Imagine a world brought to its knees, not by the thunderous shockwave of an asteroid impact or the slow, creeping despair of climate collapse, but by something far more intimate, more terrifyingly personal. A bite, a single, agonizing breach of skin, a swift, insidious transformation that doesn't merely end a life but reshapes it into something monstrous, ravenous, and relentlessly infectious. Picture cities, once vibrant hubs of human endeavor, dissolving into chaos within hours, their towering structures becoming silent monuments to a civilization consumed by an invisible enemy, an enemy that walks among us. That was us. This isn't just a grim fantasy. It's a chilling thought experiment that forces us to confront the fragile tapestry of our interconnected world, revealing how quickly order can unravel when faced with an existential threat that defies conventional understanding. The very notion of a global pandemic, one capable of turning humanity into a ravenous horde, strikes a primal chord of fear. It's a fear rooted not just in the grotesque imagery of the undead, but in the unsettling reality of how vulnerable our highly organized, globally linked society truly is. Think about the intricate web of supply chains that feed our cities, the delicate balance of trust that underpins our institutions, the shared understanding of reality that allows billions to coexist. What happens when that web is severed, that trust shattered, that understanding obliterated by a force that respects no borders, no laws, no human conventions? When the very concept of normal evaporates in a deluge of panic and contagion, what remains? How do individuals, families, and nations respond when the rules of survival are rewritten overnight, and the greatest threat comes from those who were once neighbors, friends, or even family? The scenario of a world collapsing under the weight of an unprecedented, rapidly spreading contagion forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our collective preparedness, our innate human responses to extreme stress, and the limits of our scientific and logistical capabilities. It's a race against time, not merely to find a cure, but to understand the very nature of such an outbreak, its origins, its mechanisms of spread, its vulnerabilities. What would compel any individual, with a family to protect, to abandon the vestiges of safety and embark on a desperate, globe-trotting quest for answers in a dying world? It's more than just survival. It's the desperate search for knowledge, the slim hope that understanding the enemy might offer a path, however narrow, to salvation. This journey isn't just about battling an external threat. It's a visceral exploration of the human spirit under unimaginable duress, a testament to the lengths we might go to protect what little remains, and a stark reminder of the thin line separating order from utter chaos. This exploration will delve into the real-world implications of such a rapid global collapse, examining the science of contagion, the psychology of panic and survival, and the logistical nightmares of coordinating a global response when every established system has failed. We will consider the biological principles that govern disease outbreaks, the societal tipping points that lead to widespread breakdown, and the surprising elements of human ingenuity and resilience that can emerge from the ashes of catastrophe. Our journey will not be a mere retelling of a fictional narrative, but a profound examination of the what-ifs that echo in our deepest anxieties, using the vivid, terrifying tapestry of a world overrun by the undead as a lens through which to dissect the very real vulnerabilities and strengths of human civilization. We are not just anticipating a thrilling chase. We are preparing to dissect the anatomy of global collapse and the desperate, defiant scramble for survival, seeking insights that resonate far beyond the realm of fiction. Beyond the immediate, visceral horror of a world consumed by an unknown plague lies a more unsettling question. How does such a cataclysm even begin? Consider the delicate balance of ecological systems teeming with life, where countless microbial entities exist in a precarious equilibrium with their hosts. Often the genesis of a global contagion is not a deliberate act of malice, but a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in this ancient dance, a single-minute genetic mutation, a subtle alteration in a protein structure, occurring in a remote corner of the biosphere. Picture a novel pathogen, perhaps one that has existed benignly within an animal reservoir for millennia, suddenly finding an unexpected pathway to a new species. This phenomenon, known as zoonotic spillover, is a recurring theme in humanity's long history with disease, yet its implications are dramatically amplified in our contemporary, interconnected world. Delving deeper into this context, the increasing encroachment of human civilization into pristine natural habitats acts as a critical accelerant. As populations expand and resource demands intensify, the interface between humans and wildlife becomes more frequent and less predictable. Imagine sprawling urban centers pushing against ancient forests, or the globalized trade of exotic animals for food or companionship, inadvertently creating unprecedented avenues for pathogens to jump. Species barriers, where once a localized animal disease might have burned itself out within a confined population, modern practices offer a global express lane. Consequently, a microscopic entity originating in a distant, isolated village can now, within hours, be transported across continents, infecting unsuspecting carriers long before any symptoms manifest. This inherent vulnerability is further exacerbated by the very fabric of our globalized society. Think about the speed of modern air travel, the intricate web of supply chains that crisscross the planet, or the sheer density of human populations. In megacities, historically, even the most virulent plagues, like the Black Death, took years, sometimes decades, to traverse continents, their spread limited by the pace of sailing ships or overland caravans. By contrast, a contemporary pathogen, particularly one with a short incubation period and high transmissibility, can exploit our hyperconnectivity, transforming a regional outbreak into a worldwide crisis before public health agencies can even fully identify the threat. The initial response, often hampered by a lack of immediate data, the difficulty of distinguishing novel symptoms from common ailments, and the understandable human tendency towards denial, provides a critical window of opportunity for such a contagion to establish an irreversible foothold. Crucially, the unique characteristics of a pathogen capable of such rapid transformative effects, not merely causing illness but fundamentally altering hosts' behavior, present an entirely different set of challenges at its point of origin. Unlike influenza, which typically incapacitates its victims over days, or even Ebola, which progresses within a defined time frame, a virus that induces an immediate aggressive behavioral shift bypasses conventional containment strategies. The very first infected individual, rather than seeking medical attention or isolating, becomes an instantaneous vector of chaos and further infection. This immediate, irreversible transformation bypasses typical epidemiological tracking, making contact tracing irrelevant and traditional quarantine measures utterly ineffective from the outset. Beyond the biological mechanics, the societal context surrounding such an outbreak's origin is paramount. Consider the collective human tendency to compartmentalize and rationalize, especially when faced with phenomena that defy established scientific understanding. Initial reports might be dismissed as hoaxes, localized incidents, or even mass hysteria. Misinformation, coupled with a fundamental lack of preparedness for a threat of this nature, could lead to critical delays in implementing effective countermeasures. The very systems designed to protect us, hospitals, emergency services, public information networks, could become conduits for the pathogen's spread rather than bulwarks against it, simply because their protocols are designed for a different kind of crisis, one that doesn't involve instantaneous, violent transformation. Such an unprecedented origin story, therefore, underscores a profound lesson. The modern world, for all its technological advancements, has inadvertently created the perfect breeding ground for a catastrophe of this magnitude. The speed of contagion, combined with the behavioral impact of the pathogen, fundamentally redefines the rules of engagement. It's not just a medical emergency, it's an immediate, existential threat to the very notion of organized society. Understanding this genesis, the confluence of ecological disruption, global connectivity, and a uniquely aggressive biological agent, is not merely an academic exercise. It is the first, desperate step towards comprehending the scale of the challenge and, perhaps, identifying an equally unconventional path to survival. Now, consider the chilling precision with which this novel pathogen orchestrates its devastating transformation. It's not merely a matter of infection. It's an instantaneous, almost surgical re-engineering of the host organism. Imagine the viral agents, once introduced into the bloodstream, bypassing the typical immune response to target the brainstem with alarming efficiency. Within a mere handful of seconds, often less than 10, the virus initiates a cascade of neurological changes, effectively shutting down higher cognitive functions while simultaneously hyperactivating the limbic system and motor cortex. This biological hijack doesn't simply kill, it reanimates, stripping away consciousness and empathy, replacing them with a singular overriding directive: unceasing, aggressive propagation through consumption. Furthermore, the physiology of the newly transformed entity presents an entirely new set of obstacles for any survivor. These aren't shambling corpses. Their musculature, while no longer receiving conscious commands, becomes a conduit for raw, uninhibited power, driven by an insatiable hunger. Their skeletal structures, unburdened by pain or fatigue, can endure impacts that would shatter bone in a living human. Their sensory apparatus, particularly hearing and olfaction, appears to be unnervingly heightened, allowing them to detect subtle vibrations or the faintest scent of living tissue from considerable distances. This acute perception means that silence becomes the most potent, yet most precarious, shield for the uninfected, transforming every breath, every movement, into a potential death knell. Consequently, the sheer scale of the threat is magnified by the collective behavior of these reanimated beings. While individually devoid of intellect, their numbers coalesced into a terrifying, almost fluid mass, capable of overwhelming barriers through sheer relentless pressure. Picture a living tide, each unit driven by the same primal urge, clambering over obstacles, forming impromptu ladders of bodies to breach fortifications, or simply eroding defenses through continuous, unthinking impact. This mass phenomenon isn't coordinated in the traditional sense, but emerges from the simple, unified pursuit of a single goal by countless individual units, creating a wave of destruction that defies conventional tactical responses. Another crucial layer to understanding this nightmare involves the environmental fallout of such an outbreak. Beyond the immediate danger of direct engagement, the world itself rapidly becomes an antagonist. Infrastructure, once the backbone of civilization, crumbles without maintenance. Power grids fail, water treatment plants cease operation, and communication networks fall silent, severing vital links between scattered pockets of humanity. Moreover, the omnipresent danger isn't limited to direct contact. The very air can carry the stench of decay, attracting swarms, while contaminated water sources or unsecured food supplies become secondary vectors of collapse, forcing survivors into a desperate hunt for untainted resources in a world that is rapidly spoiling. Therefore, the challenge extends far beyond simply avoiding a bite. It necessitates a radical reevaluation of every aspect of survival, from securing potable water in a world where pipes have burst and reservoirs are unmonitored, to navigating urban landscapes choked with derelict vehicles and impassable debris, all while maintaining an almost superhuman level of vigilance against an enemy that never sleeps, never tires, and never ceases its pursuit. The very concept of safety shrinks to fleeting moments of reprieve, emphasizing that survival hinges not just on fighting, but on an exhaustive, perpetual adaptation to a reality fundamentally reshaped by the virus's devastating success. Beyond the immediate, horrifying spectacle of a world overrun, the true cataclysm unfolds in the unseen cracks of the human psyche and the fundamental unraveling of societal bonds. Consider, for a moment, the profound redefinition of morality that such an apocalypse would impose. The intricate ethical frameworks painstakingly constructed over millennia, customs, shared values would dissolve into a stark, primal calculus of survival. How do concepts like justice, compassion, or even loyalty hold meaning when every stranger is a potential threat, and every resource must be fought for? The very notion of altruism becomes a dangerous luxury, tested against the brutal imperative to protect one's own, often at unimaginable cost. This isn't merely the breakdown of order, it's the erosion of the very principles that distinguish humanity from the animal kingdom, forcing individuals to confront the darkest corners of their own nature. Moreover, the psychological landscape for survivors would be a barren, treacherous terrain. Imagine the pervasive, suffocating grip of hypervigilance, a constant, exhausting state of alertness where every shadow might conceal danger, every distant sound a harbinger of doom, the cumulative trauma of witnessing civilizations collapse, the loss of loved ones, and the daily struggle for basic necessities would etch itself onto the collective consciousness, manifesting as a pervasive sense of dread, profound grief, and a crippling form of post-traumatic stress. The concept of normalcy would vanish, replaced by a new, brutal baseline where fear is the constant companion, and hope, if it exists, is a flickering, fragile ember. This enduring mental burden, far from being a secondary concern, becomes a critical factor in long-term survival, impacting decision-making, group cohesion, and the capacity for resilience. Shifting our focus, the global economic and political systems, once the intricate sinews of international relations, would not merely falter but utterly cease to exist. Picture the instantaneous obsolescence of currency, stocks, and digital wealth. The value of a dollar or a euro would plummet to zero, replaced by the immediate, tangible worth of food, water, and ammunition. International borders, once lines on a map enforced by armies and bureaucracies, would become meaningless in the face of a threat that respects no sovereignty. This vacuum of established power would inevitably lead to the emergence of localized, often brutal forms of governance: warlords, fortified communities, or desperate, transient bands, each vying for dwindling resources and struggling to enforce their own arbitrary rules. The geopolitical map would be redrawn not by treaties, but by the ebb and flow of the living and the ravenous dead, leaving a shattered mosaic of isolated outposts and lawless territories. One might also consider the radical transformation of scientific endeavor. The pursuit of pure knowledge, once a cornerstone of human progress, would be immediately superseded by an urgent, almost desperate, quest for practical solutions. Laboratories, if they survived, would become makeshift fortresses of desperate inquiry, their resources funneled exclusively into understanding the pathogens, vulnerabilities, developing defenses, or, most critically, finding a cure. Ethical considerations that once guided research, such as extensive peer review or incremental progress, would be brutally streamlined, perhaps even abandoned, in the face of humanity's imminent extinction. This shift represents a stark reordering of scientific priorities, reducing complex fields to their most essential survival applications, often under conditions of extreme duress and dwindling resources. What truly emerges from such a scenario is a profound reevaluation of fundamental human behaviors and the raw, unadorned essence of community. Stripped of the complexities of modern life, the most basic human instincts to protect, to procreate, to connect would resurface with startling clarity. People would form new bonds, often with strangers, driven by mutual need and the shared imperative to survive. The skills that truly matter would no longer be those of the digital age, but ancestral proficiencies: hunting, foraging, building, defending. Such a crucible would forge new definitions of family, of loyalty, and of what constitutes a society, perhaps leading to the formation of small, tightly knit groups bound by a shared struggle, demonstrating humanity's tenacious capacity for adaptation and resilience even in the face of absolute annihilation. It is a common misconception, often perpetuated by fiction, that confronting the infected is a straightforward affair, a simple matter of a well-placed shot or a swift blow to the head. Yet, the reality of such a pandemic would quickly dismantle this comforting illusion. Imagine the sheer biological enigma presented by a creature that, while undeniably dead in a conventional sense, continues to move, to hunt, to infect with an unyielding purpose. What if the viral agent, rather than being confined to a single, vulnerable brain region, had permeated the entire nervous system, or even initiated a cellular reanimation that renders traditional anatomical weaknesses irrelevant? This would force survivors to constantly adapt their tactics, perhaps discovering that blunt force is occasionally more effective than precision, or that certain environmental factors, like extreme heat or cold, might induce a temporary, albeit fleeting, state of dormancy. The very definition of death itself would undergo a horrifying reevaluation, pushing the boundaries of biological understanding and forcing a tactical reassessment in every harrowing encounter. Furthermore, while the ravenous horde presents the most overt danger, the silent, insidious threats of a world devoid of functional medical infrastructure would claim countless lives. Consider the individual dependent on insulin for diabetes management, the patient requiring regular dialysis, or the child battling a severe asthma attack. These aren't dramatic confrontations with the undead. They are quiet, agonizing declines, stemming from the complete cessation of pharmaceutical production, medical equipment, maintenance, and trained healthcare professionals. The simple act of childbirth, once a routine marvel, would transform into an acutely perilous event without sanitized environments, surgical intervention, or pain management. A broken bone, a severe burn, or even a persistent bacterial infection could become a death sentence, underscoring that survival isn't solely about outrunning the infected, but also about navigating a landscape where the smallest medical incident escalates into an insurmountable crisis. A profound, inescapable moral quandary would also emerge regarding the very nature of the infected themselves. Are they merely biological machines, devoid of any vestige of their former selves, or does some faint echo of humanity linger within their reanimated forms? This isn't a trivial philosophical debate. It directly influences the actions of survivors. For instance, would a desperate group hesitate to sacrifice a newly infected family member if it meant saving the collective? Or would the lingering attachment to their former identity compel a dangerous act of mercy or denial? This internal conflict could cleave communities, pitting those who advocate for cold, pragmatic eradication against those who cling to the faint hope of reversal or the sanctity of their loved ones' memories. Such a fundamental disagreement on the enemy's true essence could prove as destructive to remaining human enclaves as any external threat. Moreover, the allure of a safe zone, a fortified bastion against the encroaching darkness, would be a potent, yet often deceptive, myth. While offering temporary respite, these havens would invariably face a myriad of internal and external pressures that challenge their long-term viability. Resource depletion, sanitation breakdowns, and the psychological toll of constant confinement would erode their foundations from within. Beyond that, the strategic vulnerability of any fixed location to a relentless, unthinking enemy would become painfully evident. A single breach, a moment of lax vigilance, or the sheer overwhelming weight of the horde could transform a sanctuary into a tomb. This means true survival hinges not on finding a permanent fortress, but on cultivating adaptability, maintaining mobility, and understanding that absolute security is a dangerous illusion in a world fundamentally reordered by contagion. Consequently, the gravest challenges might not stem from the viral threat, but from the fracturing of human trust and the inevitable descent into opportunism. When societal structures crumble, the raw struggle for power and control over dwindling resources would inevitably lead to internal conflicts. Picture desperate factions warring over a cache of medical supplies, or charismatic cult leaders exploiting widespread fear to establish tyrannical rule over vulnerable populations. The integrity of any surviving community would be constantly tested by betrayal, paranoia, and the chilling realization that humanity's inherent capacity for cruelty can be just as lethal as any plague. Navigating this treacherous landscape of human nature, where alliances are fragile and every face could conceal a hidden agenda, might prove to be the most arduous and heartbreaking test of all. The echoes of a world brought to its knees by an unimaginable plague would reverberate far beyond the final, desperate battle for survival. Even if humanity were to claw its way back from the brink, the experience would indelibly reshape our collective consciousness, forcing a profound reevaluation of what truly constitutes progress and prosperity. Imagine, for a moment, the shift in priorities that would inevitably occur in the aftermath. The relentless pursuit of material wealth, the intricate dance of global commerce, and the digital cacophony of modern life would yield to a starker, more fundamental appreciation for the very essence of existence: clean air, potable water, fertile soil, and the enduring warmth of human connection. This cataclysm would serve as an agonizing, yet perhaps necessary, crucible, stripping away the superfluous and revealing the bedrock values upon which any truly resilient civilization must be built. Furthermore, consider the invaluable, albeit painful, lessons etched into the collective memory. Future generations, if they emerged, would inherit a narrative steeped in the fragility of complex systems and the dire consequences of complacency. The intricate web of global travel, once celebrated as a hallmark of advancement, would forever bear the stain of its role in accelerating humanity's downfall. Similarly, the very concept of preparedness would transcend mere contingency planning, evolving into a foundational principle for every aspect of societal design, from urban planning to scientific research. This would foster a new kind of wisdom, born from the ashes of hubris, emphasizing foresight and adaptability over unchecked expansion. Building on this, the enduring human drive for understanding, for unraveling the mysteries of the universe, would likely find renewed vigor and a sharpened focus. While the immediate aftermath might prioritize practical knowledge for reconstruction, the inherent curiosity that propels our species would inevitably resurface, albeit with a profound shift in perspective. Perhaps the pursuit of pure theoretical knowledge would become not just an academic endeavor, but a sacred act of remembrance, a way to honor the lost wisdom of a vanished era. Conversely, the catastrophic failure of certain scientific paradigms to anticipate or contain such a threat might lead to entirely novel approaches to inquiry, fostering interdisciplinary collaboration and a more holistic understanding of our place within the biosphere. Another crucial layer to this reflection involves the reprioritization of skills and vocations. In a world where the highly specialized roles of the pre-apocalypse era have become largely irrelevant, the value of foundational trades, agriculture, engineering, craftsmanship, and medicine in its most rudimentary forms would be profoundly re-established. This isn't merely a nostalgic return to simpler times. It represents a pragmatic recognition of the skills essential for rebuilding from scratch, fostering a renewed respect for manual labor and the tangible creation of necessities. Consequently, education itself would transform, moving beyond abstract theories to emphasize practical application, resilience, and problem-solving in the most immediate sense. Ultimately, the most profound legacy of such an event might be a radical re-evaluation of humanity's relationship with the natural world and technology itself. Having witnessed the devastating consequences of unchecked exploitation and the vulnerability inherent in over-reliance on complex centralized systems, future societies might embrace a more symbiotic existence with their environment and a more decentralized, robust approach to technological development. The very definition of progress would likely shift from exponential growth to sustainable equilibrium, prioritizing ecological harmony and community self-sufficiency. Thus, the terrifying bite that brought the world to its knees could paradoxically serve as a brutal catalyst for a more mindful, perhaps even more ethical, human future, reminding us that true survival hinges not just on fighting off external threats, but on continuously questioning, learning, and redefining our place in the grand tapestry of existence. The terrifying vision of humanity pushed to the precipice, teetering on the brink of absolute annihilation, ultimately compels us to confront a profound truth. Survival is merely the first, most visceral instinct. Beyond the desperate scramble, the harrowing escapes, and the grim battles, lies a deeper, more enduring challenge: the arduous process of reclaiming what it means to be human. Consider the sheer audacity of rebuilding not just structures, but the very fabric of meaning in a world irrevocably scarred. How would art, music, or philosophy re-emerge from the ashes of such profound loss? Perhaps the raw, unvarnished experiences of the apocalypse would forge new forms of expression, stripped of pretense, resonating with a universal understanding of fragility and resilience. This isn't about restoring a past golden age, but about forging a new narrative, one born from shared trauma and renewed purpose. Furthermore, the ordeal would inevitably recalibrate our understanding of true wealth, the fleeting pursuit of material possessions or abstract financial gains, once central to global ambition, would be utterly eclipsed by the profound value of fundamental resources: clean water, uncontaminated food, breathable air, and the simple security of shelter. Imagine the shift in human ingenuity, diverting from complex digital innovations to mastering sustainable agriculture, resilient engineering, and self-sufficient energy solutions. This involuntary reset could foster an unprecedented era of practical innovation, driven by necessity and a collective imperative to live in harmony with a world that has harshly demonstrated its power. Consequently, the very nature of hope would undergo a radical transformation. No longer a distant ideal tied to grand societal schemes, hope would become a daily, granular act of defiance, a single seed sprouting in barren soil, the flicker of a fire against the encroaching darkness, a shared smile amidst overwhelming despair. This isn't the hope of a miraculous cure or a sudden return to normalcy, but a tenacious, gritty determination to simply endure, to protect the fragile spark of life, and to find beauty in the smallest victories. It is a testament to the human spirit's remarkable capacity to find meaning and purpose even in the bleakest landscapes, a quiet revolution of the heart. Another crucial layer to this post-apocalyptic reflection involves the profound revaluation of knowledge. The infected, coupled with their chillingly unique ability to form living bridges and scale vertical surfaces through sheer unthinking collective action, repeatedly proved this assumption catastrophically false. This wasn't merely about breaching walls, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of an enemy that defied conventional siege tactics, turning every isolated haven into a temporary reprieve rather than a lasting sanctuary against the overwhelming tide. Furthermore, a bit of divisive debate raged among the scattered remnants of humanity's scientific and military elite regarding the optimal path forward: total eradication versus long-term adaptation. One faction passionately argued for the relentless pursuit of a biological weapon or vaccine, believing complete elimination was the only path to reclaiming the planet. Their efforts often involved desperate, high-risk expeditions into heavily infected zones, seeking rare samples or vital data, driven by an unwavering conviction in scientific salvation. Conversely, another camp contended that the sheer scale of the contagion made comprehensive elimination an impossible dream. They advocated for strategies centered on sustained survival, developing self-sufficient, defensible settlements, focusing on renewable resources, and accepting a future where humanity coexisted, albeit precariously, with the undead. This profound ideological schism often led to conflicting priorities, misallocated resources, and even outright sabotage, tragically fragmenting what little collective effort remained. Moreover, a pervasive fear-driven misconception among the uninitiated was the fallacy of the infected's cognitive development. Terrifying anecdotal accounts often fueled the idea that these creatures were somehow evolving, gaining intelligence, or developing new, sophisticated hunting strategies. This myth, though understandable in the face of such horror, created undue panic and frequently led to catastrophic misjudgments in tactical engagements. In reality, their terrifying effectiveness stemmed not from newfound cunning or learned behaviors, but from their unyielding instinctual drive, their overwhelming numbers, and their uncanny ability to exploit environmental vulnerabilities through sheer, uncoordinated mass action. They did not truly learn or strategize, they simply reacted with terrifying viral efficiency to stimuli, particularly sound, amplifying their threat without any true intellectual progression. Understanding this crucial distinction was paramount for effective survival, separating genuine danger from paralyzing, fear-induced paranoia. Building on this, however, a far more insidious and internal challenge presented itself: the hidden threat of asymptomatic carriers or latent infection. Beyond the overtly aggressive infected, the possibility existed that individuals could harbor the virus without displaying immediate symptoms, or that their transformation might be delayed for extended periods after exposure. This introduced a profound element of distrust even within ostensibly safe communities. Now, consider the agonizing dilemma of screening every newcomer, the agonizing choice between compassion and the absolute necessity of preventing another devastating internal outbreak. This silent, biological uncertainty meant that the boundaries of safety were not merely external physical barriers, but also internal biological ambiguities, making the establishment of truly secure, thriving human settlements an almost insurmountable hurdle and fostering an environment of perpetual suspicion. Consequently, as the desperate search for a solution intensified, a grim ethical controversy arose among those still clinging to scientific methodology. How far could one ethically go in the pursuit of a vaccine or an antidote? This often manifested in contentious discussions about the use of uninfected volunteers for high-risk experiments, or the capture and study of live infected specimens, frequently requiring extreme measures and leading to significant casualties among the research teams. The moral lines blurred almost beyond recognition as the potential salvation of the entire species weighed against the individual rights and lives of the few. This stark ethical quagmire underscored the brutal, agonizing choices forced upon humanity, where the desperate ends arguably justified means that would have been utterly abhorrent in any previous era. Yet even as humanity grappled with the immediate overwhelming threat, a far more intricate and often overlooked challenge emerged: the monumental, almost insurmountable task of large-scale human relocation. Imagine the logistical nightmare of attempting to move millions of uninfected individuals across continents ravaged by the undead. This wasn't merely about finding a safe spot, it involved coordinating convoys of unprecedented scale, securing fuel lines across thousands of miles of hostile territory, and establishing temporary, defensible waypoints for rest and resupply. Consider the sheer complexity of mapping routes through ruined infrastructure, bypassing choke points swarming with infected, and protecting vulnerable populations, the elderly, the infirm, children who could not keep pace with the desperate flight. This logistical quagmire often led to catastrophic losses, as convoys were ambushed, resources dwindled, or the sheer weight of numbers proved too great for any organized protection, turning migrations into prolonged, agonizing death marches. Furthermore, the relentless, pervasive trauma inflicted a profound psychological toll, eroding not just individual sanity but the very essence of human identity and purpose. Beyond the primal fear of being hunted, survivors grappled with an insidious form of moral injury, witnessing unspeakable atrocities and often being forced to commit them for survival. The loss of loved ones became a daily occurrence, transforming grief into a chronic, debilitating condition. Think of the profound despair that sets in when all previous ambitions, all cultural touchstones, all personal aspirations become utterly meaningless. In the absence of societal structures that once provided meaning, many succumbed to a nihilistic apathy, while others sought solace in extreme, often dangerous, coping mechanisms, from reckless self-endangerment to the formation of cult-like groups promising false salvation. This internal battle for the soul of humanity, fought within the individual mind, proved as critical as any external confrontation with the infected. Moreover, in the informational vacuum left by collapsed communication networks, a new battleground emerged: the struggle against manufactured narratives and societal fragmentation. With no reliable news sources, no official pronouncements beyond desperate localized broadcasts, the airwaves and whispers became fertile ground for misinformation, fear-mongering, and the rise of charismatic but dangerous figures. Picture communities, swayed by apocalyptic prophets, promising divine intervention or advocating for brutal isolationist policies. Conversely, others peddled false hope, claiming a cure was imminent or that certain safe zones were truly impregnable, leading countless desperate souls into traps. This deliberate manipulation of truth, often born of desperation or a thirst for power in the New World, fractured what little unity remained among human survivors, turning potential allies into suspicious rivals and amplifying the chaos. A less immediate, but equally devastating, challenge stemmed from the secondary public health crisis that swept through the surviving populations. While the virus claimed millions, the breakdown of sanitation, the scarcity of clean water, and the complete absence of medical infrastructure for non-viral ailments unleashed a silent, relentless wave of mortality. Consider the plight of individuals with chronic conditions, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune disorders, who faced an agonizing demise as their vital medications became unobtainable. Common infections, once easily treated with antibiotics, escalated into deadly epidemics within overcrowded, unsanitary survivor camps. Accidents, injuries, and routine childbirth became life-threatening events without access to modern medical care. This grim reality highlighted that even if the infected threat was somehow contained, humanity faced a protracted uphill battle against diseases and conditions that had been largely conquered centuries prior, threatening to decimate populations through a slow, agonizing decay rather than a sudden, violent end. Ultimately, the challenges confronting humanity extended far beyond the immediate, visceral terror of the undead. They encompassed the existential struggle to maintain order in a world devoid of it, to preserve sanity in the face of relentless trauma, to discern truth amidst a cacophony of lies, and to simply stay alive when every fundamental support system had crumbled. This multifaceted war for survival underscored the profound fragility of civilization and the enduring, yet often tested resilience of the human spirit. The relentless march of the infected was not the sole adversary. Humanity also contended with its own ingrained fallacies and the bitter internal disputes that fractured what little solidarity remained. One pervasive, yet dangerously misleading notion was the belief in the virus's eventual self-extinction, or the emergence of widespread natural immunity. Many clung to the comforting but unscientific idea that, like a wildfire consuming all its fuel, the pathogen would eventually exhaust its hosts or mutate into a less virulent form, thereby burning itself out. This insidious myth often bred a perilous function of the virus's destructive power, but also a catastrophic failure of anticipation and adaptation. Our elaborate societal structures, built on assumptions of order and predictability, proved shockingly brittle when confronted with an enemy that defied every known parameter. The speed of the fall was a chilling testament to how utterly dependent we are on the fragile scaffolding of infrastructure, governance, and collective trust, and how quickly that scaffolding can collapse when faced with a truly unprecedented biological threat that turns our own kind against us. The core truth of this new, terrifying reality lies in understanding the enemy itself, the infected, beyond their initial, shocking transformation. These creatures operate with a singular, terrifying efficiency that reshapes every aspect of survival. Imagine a biological machine, stripped of all higher cognitive function, yet retaining a primal, relentless drive. Their movements are not those of a reanimated corpse in the traditional sense. Rather, they exhibit a disturbing, almost athletic fluidity, capable of bursts of incredible speed and coordination, especially when driven by a collective impetus. Their sheer numbers, often forming vast, undulating waves, transform urban landscapes into insurmountable fortresses of flesh and teeth. Consider, for instance, how they scale obstacles, not individually, but as a living, writhing tide, clambering over one another with a chilling disregard for self-preservation, creating grotesque, human pyramids to breach walls or reach high ground. This collective behavior is a fundamental characteristic, making isolated encounters rare and large-scale confrontation almost suicidal. What defines their operational parameters, however, is not sight, but sound. These entities are profoundly drawn to noise, acting as grotesque, biological sound magnets. A dropped item, a distant shout, even the rumble of an engine becomes an irresistible beacon, drawing them in with astonishing rapidity and focus. This acute sonic sensitivity fundamentally alters the dynamics of movement and concealment. Think of navigating a ruined city. Every creak of a floorboard, every accidental clang of metal, carries the potential to unleash a torrent of undiscriminating single-minded pursuit. Consequently, silence becomes the ultimate currency of survival, a precious commodity that dictates routes, governs interactions, and elevates stealth from a tactical advantage to an absolute necessity. The mere act of breathing too loudly can spell doom. Furthermore, their physical resilience, though not limitless, presents a formidable challenge. Conventional weaponry, while capable of inflicting damage, often proves inefficient against their relentless advance. The critical vulnerability lies not in their limbs or torsos, which can absorb significant punishment, but in the complete destruction of the brainstem, the singular point where the viral reanimation appears to reside. This necessitates precise, often difficult to achieve head trauma to truly neutralize them, a task made exponentially harder when faced with a surging mass. Combat becomes an exercise in precision under extreme duress, a grim calculus of ammunition conservation versus the overwhelming odds. Navigating this transformed world also reveals a stark shift in resource management. Water, once plentiful, now requires careful sourcing and purification, as municipal systems have long ceased to function. Fuel, the lifeblood of transport and power generation, becomes a rare and fiercely contested commodity, its scarcity dictating the limits of any long-distance travel or sustained operations. Food, similarly, must be scavenged from increasingly depleted and dangerous environments. The very act of seeking basic sustenance becomes a high-stakes gamble, forcing survivors into direct confrontation with the infected or desperate competition with other human factions. Indeed, the psychological burden of this constant, unremitting threat cannot be overstated. Imagine the perpetual state of hypervigilance, where every shadow might conceal a lurking danger, every distant sound a harbinger of doom. The erosion of trust, the constant loss, and the ever-present specter of becoming one of them gnaw at the very fabric of sanity. This isn't merely about physical survival, it's about maintaining a shred of humanity in a world that has utterly lost its own. The fundamental concepts of safety, community, and future become abstract, replaced by the immediate, visceral imperative of simply existing for one more moment. This new world demands a complete reevaluation of tactics, priorities, and indeed, what it means to be alive. The infected are not merely monsters. They are the relentless, unthinking force of nature that has reclaimed the planet, and understanding their unique characteristics is the first step, however desperate, towards any hope of enduring their terrifying dominion. Beyond the immediate, visceral struggle against the ravenous tide, the global collapse ushered in a profound reordering of human priorities and societal structures, revealing unexpected truths about our collective values. Consider for a moment how the very definition of wealth underwent a radical, instantaneous transformation. The intricate financial systems, the digital currencies, the vast fortunes accumulated through generations all evaporated into meaningless abstractions overnight. In this new reality, a skilled mechanic capable of jury-rigging a generator, a botanist with knowledge of edible plants, or a doctor possessing practical medical experience became infinitely more valuable than any former titan of industry or finance. Real capital was no longer denominated in dollars or euros, but in practical skills, tangible resources, and the raw ability to adapt and survive. This fundamental shift exposed the fragile, constructed nature of our pre-apocalyptic economic paradigms. Furthermore, the cessation of centralized governance led to the rapid emergence of localized, often brutal power dynamics. The comforting illusion of national borders and global alliances dissolved, replaced by fragmented territories governed by necessity and, frequently, by force. Imagine small, self-appointed enclaves, perhaps led by former military personnel, hardened survivors, or even opportunistic individuals, each vying for control over dwindling resources or strategic strongholds. These emergent fiefdoms operated under their own improvised codes, where justice was swift and often severe, and the concept of human rights became a forgotten luxury. The very notion of a universal legal framework vanished, leaving humanity to grapple with raw, unmediated power struggles. This reordering of priorities extended deeply into the realm of human connection and trust, fundamentally altering the social contract. In a world where every stranger could be a threat, either infected or a desperate human willing to commit atrocities for survival, The default human instinct shifted from cautious optimism to profound suspicion. Forming alliances became a high-stakes gamble, requiring an almost supernatural discernment of character. The bonds of family and immediate community intensified, becoming the last bastions of loyalty, while interactions with outsiders were fraught with peril. This created a paradoxical isolation in a world overflowing with people, highlighting humanity's innate need for connection, yet simultaneously demonstrating its capacity for profound distrust under duress. Moreover, the very purpose of science and education underwent a radical metamorphosis. Abstract research, theoretical physics, and the humanities, once cornerstones of intellectual pursuit, were instantly rendered irrelevant in the face of existential threat. Laboratories, if they survived, redirected all efforts towards immediate practical solutions. The desperate search for a vaccine or cure, the development of sustainable food sources, or innovations in defensive technology. Education, too, was stripped to its bare essentials, focusing almost exclusively on survival skills, basic medicine, and practical engineering. The transmission of knowledge became an urgent, life-or-death imperative, emphasizing utility over intellectual breadth. Consequently, the ethical landscape became a treacherous quagmire, forcing survivors to confront dilemmas that would have been unthinkable in the old world. The concept of triage expanded beyond medical emergencies to encompass resource allocation, group membership, and even the agonizing decision of who deserved to live. Would you sacrifice a few to save many? When does self-preservation justify actions once considered morally reprehensible? These were not academic debates, but daily agonizing choices that etched themselves onto the souls of those who endured. The true horror was not just the external threat, but the internal battle to retain a shred of one's humanity amidst such profound moral decay. This new existence, therefore, served as a chilling mirror, reflecting the raw, unvarnished essence of human nature when stripped of all its civilized trappings. Amidst the grim struggle for survival, a collection of deeply ingrained misconceptions and fierce debates plagued humanity's desperate efforts, often proving as dangerous as the infected themselves. Consider, for instance, the enduring fantasy of the impenetrable fortress. Many survivors, clinging to the familiar blueprints of pre-apocalypse defense, invested precious time and resources into establishing seemingly unassailable strongholds, remote island redoubts, high-walled compounds, or even repurposed skyscraper complexes. Yet, the relentless, almost tidal nature of interconnectedness, to cherish the delicate balance of our ecosystems, and to critically examine the foundations of our own collective well-being. Ultimately, this exploration transcends the realm of fiction, offering a compelling invitation for profound reflection. It challenges us to consider what truly matters when all else is stripped away, to recognize the profound value of every breath, every connection, every act of kindness. The harrowing tale of humanity's near, sparked by a single, insidious bite, leaves us not with despair, but with a sharpened sense of purpose. It is a potent reminder that the true practice of resilience, the cultivation of empathy, and the pursuit of meaningful knowledge are not merely responses to catastrophe, but essential, ongoing acts of creation. The true practice begins now, not in the face of the unthinkable, but in the mindful choices we make each day to honor our shared humanity and safeguard the fragile miracle of life itself. Imagine a world where the very fabric of society, the intricate tapestry of order and routine, unravels not over decades or years, but in a matter of days, hours, even minutes. Picture the bustling metropolises, the quiet suburbs, the remote villages, all simultaneously overwhelmed by an insidious, unfathomable force. This isn't a slow-burn dystopia, nor a gradual descent into anarchy. This is an abrupt, cataclysmic implosion, a terrifying testament to how thin the veneer of civilization truly is. What if the most primal, universal fear, that of losing control, of witnessing everything you cherish vanish in an instant, became a global reality, driven by an enemy that wears the faces of your neighbors, your friends, your family? This is the terrifying dawn of a new age, an age where humanity is not merely challenged, but quite literally drowning in a tide of teeth and terror. The world as we knew it ceased to exist with breathtaking, horrifying speed. A relentless virus, an unseen predator, swept across continents with an efficiency that defied comprehension, transforming human beings into a ravenous, unstoppable, undead horde. There was no time for preparation. No global summit to strategize, no warning that truly prepared anyone for the sheer overwhelming deluge. One moment, life was ordinary, filled with its mundane concerns and familiar rhythms. The next, the streets were choked with screaming, the air thick with the stench of fear and decay, and every corner held the promise of unimaginable violence. Cities, once bastions of human achievement, crumbled into chaotic graveyards, their skylines becoming monuments to humanity's rapid, devastating decay. The initial chaos wasn't merely a localized outbreak, it was a global contagion, a terrifying mirror reflecting the fragility of our interconnected world as it fractured into a million pieces. Into this maelstrom of despair and destruction is thrust Gerry Lane, a former United Nations operative whose days of navigating global crises were thought long behind him. His world, once defined by international diplomacy and covert missions, was now reduced to a single, primal imperative: survival. Ripped from the precarious safety of his family, torn from the desperate hope of sheltering his loved ones from the encroaching nightmare, Lane is forced onto a path he never imagined. His past skills, once applied to geopolitical flashpoints, are now his only hope in a desperate global fight for existence. The immediate threat is visceral, omnipresent: the swarming infected. Their guttural roars and relentless pursuit a constant soundtrack to a world gone mad. But the deeper, more insidious enemy is the crushing despair, the profound sense of a dying planet, a pervasive hopelessness that threatens to consume what little humanity remains. Driven by an unwavering primal urge to protect his loved ones, to carve out even a sliver of a future for them in this apocalyptic landscape, Lane embarks on a frantic, globe-trotting quest against time. This is not a mission of conquest or retaliation. It is a desperate search for answers, a frantic pursuit of the virus's elusive origin, and any potential weaknesses that might offer a glimmer of hope. His journey is less a strategic endeavor, and more a visceral gauntlet, a relentless series of harrowing encounters that push the limits of human endurance and sanity. Every step is fraught with peril, every decision carries the weight of humanity's future. The stakes are absolute. Failure means not just the loss of his family, but the final, irreversible extinction of the human race. The path ahead is shrouded in uncertainty, paved with unimaginable horrors and the constant threat of being overwhelmed by the very tide he seeks to turn. There are no safe havens, no clear objectives beyond the desperate need to understand the enemy and find a way, any way, to stop it. This is a race against an accelerating clock, a desperate scramble across a world consumed by its own undoing. It is a journey into the heart of the darkness, where the only compass is the unwavering resolve to protect those he holds dear, and the only light is the faint possibility of discovering a truth that could save what little remains of mankind. The culmination promises a decisive, breathless gamble for humanity's very existence, a final, desperate stand against an enemy that has already claimed so much. Before the world descended into the maelstrom of teeth and terror, there was but a whisper, an almost imperceptible tremor in the distant corners of the globe. Imagine, if you will, the first true spark of this global conflagration, not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, insidious shift in a remote, densely populated region, perhaps a zoonotic jump from an animal host to a lone human. This initial victim, a patient zero in the grim lexicon that would soon dominate humanity's vocabulary, likely experienced symptoms so common, so deceptively benign, that they were icily dismissed as a particularly virulent strain of influenza or a novel, but manageable febrile illness. The subtle behavioral changes, the nascent aggression, were initially attributed to delirium or pain, tragically masking the true, horrifying nature of the emerging plague. What amplified this seemingly innocuous beginning into an unstoppable cascade was the biological cunning of the pathogen itself. Consider a virus with an incredibly short incubation period, perhaps mere seconds or minutes from exposure to full, terrifying transformation. Couple this with a hyperaggressive mutation that grants it not only unprecedented transmissibility through various vectors, be it a bite, a splash of fluid, or even airborne particles in close proximity, but also a terrifying capacity to reanimate neural pathways controlling gross motor functions, even after clinical death. This chilling efficiency meant that by the time medical professionals, overwhelmed by an unprecedented surge of patients, began to piece together the horrifying pattern, the contagion had already outpaced any conventional containment strategy. The very speed of its progression turned every hospital, every emergency room into an unwitting incubator, a point of further dissemination rather than a sanctuary. The spread was then catalyzed by the interconnected arteries of modern society. Picture the unsuspecting traveler, unknowingly carrying the nascent infection from a provincial outpost to a bustling international hub, a single cough in an airport lounge, an unwashed hand on public transport, a brief, unassuming encounter in a crowded marketplace. Each interaction became a perilous link in an ever-expanding chain of infection. Initial reports, dismissed as sensationalist rumors or isolated incidents, slowly began to coalesce into a disturbing mosaic. Authorities, conditioned to respond to traditional threats, found themselves paralyzed by the sheer novelty and overwhelming scale of this biological anomaly. The sheer lack of precedent, coupled with a natural human inclination towards disbelief in the face of the truly unthinkable, created a vacuum of effective response. Consequently, what began as isolated clusters quickly metastasized into widespread outbreaks across multiple continents. The critical mass was reached when emergency services, law enforcement, and medical infrastructure, already stretched thin, buckled under the simultaneous pressure. Communications networks, once symbols of global unity, became conduits for panic and misinformation, then failed entirely. The public, initially confused, then alarmed, finally succumbed to raw, primal terror as the horrifying truth dawned. The familiar faces of their neighbors and loved ones were transforming into something monstrous, something ravenous. The very systems designed to protect and support society became the first casualties, leaving populations utterly exposed to the encroaching nightmare. A crucial layer to understanding this rapid unraveling is the psychological impact of witnessing such a profound, immediate shift in the human condition. Imagine the visceral horror of seeing someone you know, someone you spoke to moments ago, suddenly contort into an unthinking, aggressive entity driven by an insatiable hunger. This wasn't merely a disease. It was an erasure of identity, a grotesque perversion of humanity. The psychological shockwaves were as devastating as the physical contagion, eroding trust, fracturing communities, and stripping away the layers of civility that underpin organized society. The instinct for self-preservation, untethered from social norms, quickly devolved into a desperate, every person for themselves scramble for survival. Therefore, the world's rapid decay wasn't solely scavenging rare components to build makeshift data readers or reverse engineering ancient software. Conversely, the sheer impossibility of recovering much of it would force a profound shift towards analog methods of knowledge preservation, handwritten journals, hand-drawn schematics, and oral traditions, creating a future where information's value is directly proportional to its durability and simplicity of access. Moreover, the arduous journey of intellectual recovery would inevitably encounter resistance from emerging superstitions or anti-intellectual factions. In a world gripped by fear and uncertainty, charismatic figures might exploit desperation by promoting simplistic, often dangerous beliefs that reject reason and empirical observation. Recovered scientific knowledge, particularly if it contradicts deeply held new fears or rituals, could be met with suspicion or outright hostility. The proponents of salvaged wisdom would face the daunting task of not only rediscovering and applying knowledge but also demonstrating its practical, tangible value in a way that resonates with a traumatized populace, battling ignorance as fiercely as they would the infected. Consequently, the re-establishment of intercommunity intellectual exchange would be a slow, perilous endeavor. Imagine courageous knowledge couriers risking their lives to transport fragile data packets, perhaps hand-drawn maps of viable agricultural land or crude schematics for a wind turbine between isolated settlements. Scholarly discourse would unfold not in grand halls, but through sporadic, often dangerous rendezvous points, where vital information is exchanged under the constant threat of ambush. This fragmented communication would make the verification of new findings exceptionally challenging, yet the desperate need for shared solutions would compel these precarious collaborations, forming the fragile threads of a new global intellectual network, born from necessity and forged in peril. Reflecting on this journey so far, we have traversed not merely a landscape of physical devastation, but a profound terrain of shattered certainties and emergent truths. The initial horrifying unraveling, sparked by a microscopic agent, illuminated the startling fragility of our interconnected world, revealing how swiftly the intricate scaffolding of civilization could buckle under a threat that defied conventional understanding. This was not a gradual erosion, but a sudden, violent reordering, exposing the delicate balance between order and chaos, and underscoring the profound vulnerabilities inherent in a society built upon complex globalized dependencies. The very fabric of human interaction, once woven with intricate threads of societal convention, would be torn asunder, forcing an agonizing reevaluation of fundamental ethical principles. In the crucible of such an ordeal, the deepest facets of our nature, both astonishingly resilient and disturbingly primal, would be laid bare, challenging every preconceived notion of morality and societal cohesion. The grand architectures of global governance and economic exchange, once seemingly immutable, would crumble into irrelevance, their complexities yielding to a stark, immediate calculus of survival. Yet, from this profound deconstruction, new, often decentralized, forms of organization would invariably arise, testament to an enduring, if desperate, human ingenuity. This forced simplicity would reshape aspirations, diverting collective energy from abstract pursuits to the tangible, immediate necessities of existence. The psychological burden of such a transformation, however, would be immense, forging a generation perpetually marked by loss and hypervigilance, their very perception of safety redefined by the chilling lessons of a world irrevocably altered. The silent threats, those often overlooked in the face of overt horror, would emerge as equally potent adversaries, underscoring the systemic fragility that extends far beyond a mere biological contagion. The relentless pursuit of knowledge, once a structured academic endeavor, would transform into an urgent, often perilous global scavenger hunt, each retrieved fragment of information a vital clue in a race against oblivion. This intellectual odyssey, fraught with ethical dilemmas and constant adaptation, underscores the profound shift in how humanity would seek to comprehend and ultimately counter its most existential threats. The very methods of scientific inquiry would be stripped down to their rawest form, driven by a desperate imperative to find a weakness, a pattern, a solution in the biological enigma that brought humanity to its knees. This process would challenge long-held assumptions about research, collaboration, and the very definition of progress, as every experiment, every observation, carries the weight of humanity's future. Drawing these intricate strands together, we begin to perceive a mosaic of profound transformation, where the very act of survival reshapes the soul of a species. The echoes of a world brought to its knees by an invisible, relentless adversary would resonate through generations, compelling a reevaluation of every foundational assumption. This crucible of suffering and adaptation presents not merely a grim end, but a stark, profound beginning, a testament to the enduring, often paradoxical, capacity of life to find new pathways forward even when seemingly stripped of all hope. It is a narrative that compels us to look beyond the immediate horror to the deeper, more enduring questions about our own preparedness, our inherent resilience, and the true meaning of progress. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider how these insights compel us to confront not just hypothetical threats, but the latent strengths and vulnerabilities that lie within the human spirit. For in contemplating such a profound unwinding, we are not merely observing a fictional collapse, but holding a mirror to our own capacity for adaptation and, crucially, to the enduring drive to redefine what it truly means to exist, even when faced with the ultimate test. The journey through this imagined catastrophe is, in essence, an exploration of the human condition itself, pushing us to consider what remains when everything else is stripped away, and what new forms of wisdom that might emerge from the ashes of a world reborn. The chilling thought experiment we've explored, of a world brought to its knees not by a cataclysmic impact but by an insidious internal unraveling, ultimately serves as a profound mirror. It reflects not just the imagined horror of a ravenous horde, but the startling fragility inherent in the intricate tapestry of our own civilization. This imagined collapse, initiated by a single, transformative bite, laid bare the delicate balance upon which our global society rests, exposing how quickly the pillars of order, trust, and shared understanding can crumble when confronted by a threat that defies conventional logic and overwhelms established systems. It forced us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our greatest vulnerabilities often lie not in external forces, but within the very complexities we have meticulously constructed. In the crucible of such an apocalypse, the superficial layers of modern existence would be stripped away, compelling an agonizing reevaluation of what truly holds value. The relentless pursuit of material wealth, the intricate dance of global commerce, and the digital cacophony that once defined progress would yield to a stark, primal appreciation for fundamental necessities, clean water, fertile soil, and the enduring warmth of human connection. This forced simplicity, while born of immense suffering, would paradoxically illuminate a path towards a more grounded, sustainable existence. It would underscore that true prosperity resides not in endless accumulation, but in the resilient self-sufficiency of communities and the compassionate bonds forged in shared adversity. The psychological landscape of survivors, forever marked by loss and hypervigilance, would nonetheless foster a unique wisdom, a deep-seated understanding of life's preciousness that might otherwise remain unappreciated. Yet, amidst the devastation, the narrative reveals an unwavering, almost defiant, human spirit. It is the relentless drive to comprehend the unknown, to salvage knowledge from the wreckage, and to apply ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. The desperate pursuit of a solution, however perilous, underscores humanity's innate capacity for adaptation, for collaboration across impossible divides, and for finding glimmers of hope even when hope itself seems a luxury. This inherent curiosity, this unyielding will to understand, becomes not merely an academic pursuit but a fundamental survival mechanism, pushing the boundaries of scientific inquiry and ethical compromise in a desperate gambit for existence. The ingenuity born from necessity, the reprioritization of foundational skills, and the quiet resilience of fragmented communities paint a powerful picture of humanity's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. The world that emerges from such a crucible, if it triumphs, would be irrevocably altered, scarred yet perhaps profoundly wiser. It would be a world where the quiet hum of nature might replace the roar of industry, where local connections might supersede global networks, and where the lessons of fragility are etched into every new endeavor. This imagined journey through the apocalypse serves as a powerful mirror, reflecting not just hypothetical threats, but the very real vulnerabilities and strengths that lie within our own contemporary society. It compels us to ponder the systemic risks embedded in our diversity, or even the ethical harvesting of abandoned technological remnants, fostering a new, albeit fragile, sense of planetary responsibility. This profound shift in human interaction would likewise reshape the very nature of conflict. Wars, if they arose, would likely be brutal skirmishes over finite resources or strategic strongholds, fought by desperate hardened survivors. However, a deeper, perhaps more insidious, form of conflict could also emerge, ideological clashes between communities that developed radically different philosophies of survival and governance. Some might embrace strict authoritarianism for perceived security, while others champion radical egalitarianism, These philosophical divides could become as potent a source of friction as any material scarcity, testing the limits of human tolerance and the capacity for peaceful coexistence. When fundamental worldviews diverge so dramatically, furthermore, the very presence of the cleared yet hauntingly silent remnants of the infected would serve as a constant, chilling reminder. These spectral landscapes, once teeming with the ravenous, would become reluctant monuments to humanity's near extinction. How would societies choose to interact with these ghost zones? Would they be meticulously cleansed and cautiously re-inhabited, or left as sacred, forbidden territories, serving as perpetual warnings against hubris and complacency? The decision of whether to reclaim or abandon these vast, silent spaces would reflect humanity's ongoing psychological battle with its past, shaping future urban planning, migration patterns, and even the collective unconscious. Consequently, the global landscape would be etched not just by physical ruin, but by the indelible psychological scars of the pandemic, leading to the emergence of entirely new cultural touchstones. Stories of heroism and sacrifice would intertwine, with chilling cautionary tales, forming a rich, complex tapestry of memory. This shared, traumatic history would bind the scattered remnants of humanity in a way that pre-collapse globalization never could, forging a new, profound sense of shared destiny. The future, therefore, would be built not merely on surviving, but on the wisdom gleaned from the very edge of annihilation, forever marked by the lessons learned from a world that almost ended with a bite. The profound aftermath of a global cataclysm, even one where humanity manages to cling to existence, would compel a radical revaluation of what truly constitutes a thriving society. Beyond the immediate needs of sustenance and security, consider the inevitable yearning for beauty, for abstract thought, for the very expressions of the human spirit that distinguish us from mere survivors. Imagine the painstaking rediscovery of forgotten crafts, the nuanced techniques of weaving intricate fabrics, the delicate artistry of hand-forged tools, or the complex harmonies of classical music. These aren't survival skills, yet their resurgence would signal a profound communal healing, a defiant reassertion of cultural heritage amidst the ruins. Furthermore, the philosophical inquiries that once occupied ivory towers would descend into the everyday. As scattered communities grapple with existential questions, the nature of evil, the meaning of suffering, and the enduring purpose of life, often around flickering campfires, fostering a new, grounded wisdom. A unique perspective would emerge from a generation born into this transformed world. Individuals who know nothing of the before. For them, the ravaged landscapes and the pervasive quietude are not anomalies but their baseline reality. Would they conceptualize a world teeming with billions, powered by invisible currents, or connected by instantaneous global communication? Their understanding of history would be shaped by the hushed tones of elders, by fragmented artifacts, and by the visceral evidence of a fallen civilization. This generation, unburdened by the specific traumas of witnessing the collapse, might possess an unparalleled adaptability, a pragmatic ingenuity unencumbered by nostalgia, allowing them to forge truly novel solutions and pathways for future development. Their inherent resilience could become the very engine of humanity's long-term resurgence. Simultaneously, the planet itself would embark on a remarkable journey of ecological recovery, driven by the drastic reduction in human footprint. Picture vast tracts of land, once scarred by industry, slowly rewilding, as native flora reclaim concrete expanses and wildlife repopulates silent forests. This natural resurgence would not merely be a backdrop, it would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with its environment. Gone would be the era of relentless extraction. In its place, a profound sense of stewardship might blossom. Communities would learn to live in more harmonious symbiosis with the recovering ecosystems, understanding that their own survival is inextricably linked to the health of the biosphere, fostering a deep, almost spiritual reverence for the living world. Moreover, the cautious re-engagement with technology would be characterized by a newfound discernment. The indiscriminate embrace of every innovation, a hallmark of the pre-cataclysmic era, would be replaced by a pragmatic selection. Complex, energy-intensive systems prone to catastrophic failure would be viewed with suspicion, while robust, repairable, and decentralized technologies would be prized. Consider the meticulous restoration of hydroelectric dams for localized power, or the painstaking re-establishment of secure, low-bandwidth communication networks for inter-community contact. This isn't a rejection of progress, but a deliberate, wisdom-driven choice to prioritize resilience and sustainability over sheer computational power or fleeting convenience, reflecting a profound lesson learned from the fragility of over-reliance. Ultimately, the profound experience of near extinction would catalyze a deep spiritual and philosophical reckoning across humanity. Stripped of the distractions of abundance, individuals and communities would confront fundamental questions about their purpose and place in the cosmos. Old belief systems might be reinterpreted through the lens of survival and loss, or entirely new philosophies might emerge, emphasizing concepts like interconnectedness, collective responsibility, and the sacred value of simply enduring. This isn't about blind faith, Rather, it's a search for meaning in the face of overwhelming adversity, a profound quest for narratives that can anchor and inspire a species forever changed by the bite that almost ended it all, yet forced it to truly live. The sheer intellectual void left by a global collapse would present an unprecedented hurdle, far more insidious than crumbling infrastructure. Imagine the vast libraries of human knowledge, once digitized and instantly accessible, suddenly rendered inert, trapped within dead servers or inoperable devices. The loss extends beyond mere data. It encompasses the disappearance of specialized skills, the nuanced understanding of complex systems, and the tacit knowledge held by millions of experts who vanished with the old world. How does a fledgling society begin to piece together the shattered fragments of medicine, engineering, or even advanced agriculture, when the very pathways to that knowledge have been obliterated? This isn't simply about rediscovering books. It's about rebuilding the entire intellectual scaffolding that supported civilization, brick by painstaking brick, from a scattered handful of survivors. Consequently, the emergence of dedicated knowledge enclaves would become a critical, yet precarious, phenomenon. Picture small groups of survivors, perhaps former academics, engineers, or even skilled artisans, converging in isolated, defensible locations, desperately attempting to salvage and reconstruct specific disciplines. These aren't universities, in the traditional sense, but more akin to monastic orders, meticulously transcribing salvaged texts, experimenting with rudimentary tools, and painstakingly piecing together forgotten algorithms from fragmented memories. The inherent danger of their work attracting unwanted attention, the constant threat of resource depletion, or the loss of their few remaining experts would make every incremental discovery a profound victory against overwhelming odds. The educational paradigm itself would undergo a radical transformation. Formal classrooms, with their structured curricula and theoretical lectures, would be largely obsolete. Instead, learning would revert to a deeply experiential apprenticeship. Model children and indeed adults would learn by doing, guided by the few remaining skilled individuals. Consider a young person learning rudimentary medicine by observing a desperate amputation, or mastering engineering by helping to repair a salvaged water pump. Knowledge would be passed down through direct demonstration and immediate application, focusing squarely on practical competencies essential for survival and rebuilding. This stark shift would foster a generation deeply connected to the tangible world, their understanding rooted in immediate utility rather than abstract concepts. A further consideration involves the daunting challenge of bridging the digital dark age. Billions of gigabytes of information, scientific breakthroughs, historical records, cultural masterpieces are locked away on defunct hard drives in silent servers, inaccessible without the complex power grids and highly specialized technicians of the pre-collapse era. Recovering even a fraction of this data would require monumental efforts, perhaps involving chilling reality of human depravity witnessed during the collapse. Re-establishing communal bonds would demand an almost radical act of faith, a conscious decision to extend vulnerability despite ingrained suspicion. This arduous process might manifest in small, deliberate acts of reciprocity and shared vulnerability, slowly reweaving the tattered fabric of human connection. The very architecture of new communities could reflect this, prioritizing transparency, mutual accountability, and direct personal engagement over impersonal, bureaucratic systems. In a related vein, the shaping of history and collective memory would become an intensely contested, yet vital, endeavor. How would the stories of the apocalypse be told to future generations? Would the emphasis be on heroism and resilience, or a stark, unvarnished account of horror and human failings? The creation of new mythologies, new foundational narratives, would be crucial for forging a coherent identity for the post-plague world. This isn't merely about recording facts, it's about constructing meaning from chaos, ensuring that the profound lessons of fragility and interdependence are not lost, yet without allowing the trauma to perpetually define their existence. Think of the oral traditions that might emerge, passed down around communal fires, shaping the moral compass of a new humanity. Looking ahead, a critical challenge would involve the re-establishment of formalized justice and governance in a landscape where established law had dissolved. With the collapse of traditional legal frameworks, what new social contracts would emerge to regulate behavior and resolve disputes? Perhaps a localized, restorative justice model, rooted in community consensus and direct accountability, would supplant the impersonal punitive systems of the past. The very definition of crime would likely shift, with offenses against communal survival, such as resource hoarding or actions that jeopardize group safety, becoming paramount, reflecting the raw pragmatic needs of a nascent society. This transformation would demand profound ethical debates, shaping the fundamental principles of their emerging social order. The very concept of wilderness would also be profoundly no longer a distant, pristine frontier or a recreational escape. The wild would encompass vast, reclaimed urban centers and overgrown infrastructure. These ghost cities would become potent symbols of both loss and nature's relentless reclamation, serving as both resource caches and dangerous, unpredictable territories. This evolving relationship with the untamed would foster a new breed of human adaptability, blurring the lines between settled life and the primal hunt for sustenance and safety in a world where the boundaries of civilization have been utterly redrawn. The wild would not just be external, it would be an ever-present internal landscape within the human spirit, a testament to the raw, untamed drive for survival, the profound aftermath of a global cataclysm. Even one where humanity manages to cling to existence would compel a radical revaluation of what truly constitutes a thriving society. Beyond the immediate needs of sustenance and security, consider the inevitable yearning for beauty, for abstract thought, for the very expressions of the human spirit that distinguish us from mere survivors. Imagine the painstaking rediscovery of forgotten crafts, the nuanced techniques of weaving intricate fabrics, the delicate artistry of hand-forged tools, or the complex harmonies of classical music. These aren't survival skills, yet their resurgence would signal a profound communal healing, a defiant reassertion of cultural heritage amidst the ruins. Furthermore, the philosophical inquiries that once occupied ivory towers would descend into the everyday. As scattered communities grapple with existential questions, the nature of evil, the meaning of suffering, and the enduring purpose of life, often around flickering campfires, fostering a new, grounded wisdom, a unique perspective would emerge from a generation born into this transformed world. Individuals who know nothing of the before. For them, the ravaged landscapes and the pervasive quietude are not anomalies but their baseline reality. How would they conceptualize a world teeming with billions, powered by invisible currents, or connected by instantaneous global communication? Their understanding of history would be shaped by the hushed tones of elders, by fragmented artifacts, and by the visceral evidence of a fallen civilization. This generation, unburdened by the specific traumas of witnessing the collapse, might possess an unparalleled adaptability, a pragmatic ingenuity unencumbered by nostalgia, allowing them to forge truly novel solutions and pathways for future development. Their inherent resilience could become the very engine of humanity's long-term resurgence. Simultaneously, the planet itself would embark on a remarkable journey of ecological recovery, driven by the drastic reduction in human footprint. Picture vast tracts of land, once scarred by industry, slowly rewilding as native flora reclaim concrete expanses and wildlife repopulates silent forests. This natural resurgence would not merely be a backdrop, it would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with its environment. Gone would be the era of relentless extraction. In its place, a profound sense of stewardship might blossom. Communities would learn to live in more harmonious symbiosis with recovering ecosystems, understanding that their own survival is inextricably linked to the health of the biosphere, fostering a deep, almost spiritual reverence for the living world. Moreover, the cautious re-engagement with technology would be characterized by a newfound discernment. The indiscriminate embrace of every innovation, a hallmark of the pre-cataclysmic era, would be replaced by a pragmatic selectivity. Complex, energy-intensive systems prone to catastrophic failure would be viewed with suspicion, while robust, repairable, and decentralized technologies would be prized. Consider the meticulous restoration of hydroelectric dams for localized power, or the painstaking re-establishment of secure, low-bandwidth communication networks for intercommunity contact. This isn't a rejection of progress, but a deliberate, wisdom-driven choice to prioritize resilience and sustainability over sheer computational power or fleeting convenience, reflecting a profound lesson learned from the fragility of over-reliance. Ultimately, the profound experience of near extinction would catalyze a deep spiritual and philosophical reckoning across humanity. Stripped of the distractions of abundance, individuals and communities would confront fundamental questions about their purpose and place in the cosmos. Old belief systems might be reinterpreted through the lens of survival and loss, or entirely new philosophies might emerge, emphasizing concepts like interconnectedness, collective responsibility, and the sacred value of simply enduring. This isn't about blind faith. Rather, it's a search for meaning in the face of overwhelming adversity, a profound quest for narratives that can anchor and inspire a species forever changed by the bite that almost ended it all, yet paradoxically forced it to truly live. Beyond immediate restoration, a world that has stared down extinction would face the monumental task of establishing entirely new mechanisms for long-term planetary vigilance. Imagine the imperative for a global disease surveillance network unlike any before, not merely for identifying novel pathogens, but for continuously monitoring the environmental factors that might precipitate another zoonotic spillover. This would necessitate a meticulous, almost obsessive, tracking of wildlife populations, climate shifts, and the subtle movements of human survivors, all aimed at detecting the faintest whisper of a new biological threat before it can manifest into a roar. Such a system, sparse and decentralized at first, would gradually knit together the surviving scientific minds, forming a distributed intelligence dedicated to preventative biosecurity. a stark contrast to the reactive measures that failed so catastrophically before. Moreover, consider the complex, often fraught, dynamics that would emerge between the disparate enclaves of humanity that managed to endure. The notion of international relations would be reborn, not from established treaties and diplomatic protocols, but from a raw, pragmatic need for resource exchange, shared defense, and the pooling of scarce expertise. Visualize fragile trade routes being painstakingly re-established across dangerous, unpatrolled territories, carrying not luxury goods, but vital seeds, medical supplies, or rare technological components. This intercommunity interaction would to be a delicate dance between mutual benefit and deep-seated suspicion. A constant negotiation for survival where trust is hard-won and easily shattered, profoundly shaping the geopolitical contours of the post-apocalyptic age. In a striking parallel, the very concept of global commons would undergo a radical redefinition. Who would lay claim to the vast empty oceans, the untamed wildernesses, or the silent digital archives of a lost world? The absence of established sovereign powers would invite both opportunistic exploitation and visionary collaboration. Perhaps new forms of shared stewardship would emerge for these critical resources, driven by the collective memory of ecological collapse and the desperate need for sustainable practices. This could lead to innovative agreements for managing migratory animal populations, safeguarding the very psyche of a generation that witnessed civilization's precipitous fall. This collective experience would undoubtedly foster an entirely new societal blueprint, one characterized by an acute awareness of interconnectedness and an inherent distrust of the very systems that once promised stability. The future, therefore, would not be about restoring a past paradigm, but about forging an entirely novel path, shaped by hard-won lessons in resilience and the poignant memory of nearly losing everything. Consider, then, how this profound shift would alter our aspirations. The former emphasis on boundless material acquisition and the relentless pursuit of economic expansion, once hallmarks of global ambition, would likely recede into historical anomaly. In its place, a deeper reverence for fundamental necessities, clean water, fertile land, and robust community networks would emerge as the true markers of prosperity. This recalibration of values would naturally prioritize sustainable practices, fostering innovations centered on resource regeneration and ecological harmony, fundamentally transforming our interaction with the natural world. Consequently, ingenuity would pivot from abstract digital advancements to tangible solutions for survival and communal thriving, fostering a profound respect for foundational skills and practical craftsmanship. Furthermore, the very concept of human progress would undergo a rigorous re-examination. No longer measured solely by technological leaps or economic output, advancement would be gauged by our capacity for empathy, our ability to foster genuine connections, and our collective commitment to safeguarding the delicate balance of existence. This might lead to a more decentralized, localized model of human settlement and governance, where smaller self-reliant communities, bound by shared purpose and mutual aid, become the new norm. The inherent fragility of large, complex systems, so devastatingly exposed during the collapse, would serve as a constant, sobering reminder, guiding every decision towards robustness and adaptability. Beyond the practicalities of reconstruction, the intellectual landscape would also be profoundly reshaped. The relentless human drive for understanding, far from being extinguished, would likely intensify, but with a sharpened focus on existential questions and the enduring mysteries of life. Scientific inquiry would be imbued with a solemn duty to comprehend not just the mechanisms of pathogens, but the intricate interplay of biological, social, and environmental factors that govern planetary health. This would foster a new breed of interdisciplinary thought, recognizing that true wisdom lies in holistic understanding, ensuring that the hard-won lessons of survival are meticulously preserved and transmitted across generations as a bulwark against future, unforeseen threats. Ultimately, the thought experiment of a world on the brink, forced to confront its own vulnerability, serves as a powerful mirror reflecting our present realities. It compels us to ponder our inherent strengths, our capacity for adaptation, our unwavering courage in the face of adversity, and our innate drive to protect what we cherish. Yet it also highlights our profound weaknesses, the seductive comfort of complacency, the divisive nature of fear, and the ease with which trust can erode. The enduring question, therefore, is not merely how we would survive such a cataclysm, but how we might live differently, more consciously, more compassionately, and with a deeper appreciation for the intricate, fragile miracle that is human civilization long before any bite forces us to truly value it. The world, if it were to survive such an unthinkable plague, would emerge irrevocably altered, not merely scarred, but fundamentally recalibrated. Ponder for a moment the profound silence that would fall across vast swaths of the globe, the absence of traffic, industrial hum, and the ceaseless chatter of billions. This newfound quietude would force a re-engagement with the natural world's subtle symphony, a return to listening to wind through shattered buildings, the rustle of overgrown foliage, or the distant call of wildlife reclaiming abandoned urban centers. This auditory shift would not be merely an aesthetic change. It would foster a deeper, more primal connection to the planet, demanding a humility previously absent in humanity's dominant stride. This altered soundscape would become a constant, subconscious reminder of what was lost and what, against all odds, endures. Beyond this sensory transformation, consider the radical reevaluation of human ambition that would inevitably occur, the relentless pursuit of material accumulation, the intricate dance of global commerce, and the digital cacophony that once defined progress would likely recede into the annals of a forgotten era. Instead, a starker, more profound appreciation for fundamental necessities: potable water, fertile soil, secure shelter, and the enduring warmth of human connection would emerge as the true markers of prosperity. This shift in values would naturally prioritize sustainable practices, fostering innovations centered on resource regeneration and ecological harmony, fundamentally transforming our interaction with the natural world. Consequently, ingenuity would pivot from abstract digital advancements to tangible solutions for communal thriving, fostering a profound respect for foundational skills and practical craftsmanship. Moreover, the very concept of societal structure would undergo an unprecedented metamorphosis. The inherent fragility of large, centralized systems, so devastatingly exposed during the collapse, would serve as a constant, sobering reminder, guiding every decision towards robustness and adaptability. This might lead to the proliferation of decentralized, localized communities, bound by shared purpose and mutual aid, where resilience is built from the ground up rather than imposed from above. Trust, once a largely unconscious assumption within established frameworks, would become a meticulously earned commodity, forged in the crucible of shared struggle and reciprocal support. These newly formed bonds, perhaps smaller in scale than nations, would possess a deeper, more visceral strength, rooted in shared survival. A pivotal aspect of this recreation would be the reimagining of education. No longer a conveyor belt for specialized careers, learning would transform into a holistic endeavor focused on practical knowledge, critical thinking, and the cultivation of adaptability. Imagine curricula emphasizing wilderness survival, sustainable agriculture, basic engineering, and the invaluable lessons gleaned from the preceding catastrophe. History would be taught not as a detached sequence of events, but as a living narrative of human resilience, folly, and the enduring capacity for both destruction and extraordinary kindness. This would cultivate a generation acutely aware of its vulnerabilities, yet fiercely determined to build a future founded on wisdom rather than hubris. The lasting consequence would be a profound philosophical shift in humanity's perception of its place within the vast cosmic tapestry. Stripped bare of technological illusions and societal constructs, we would confront our raw, biological essence, recognizing ourselves as merely one species among countless others, susceptible to forces far beyond our control. This humility, born from the crucible of near extinction, could foster a new worldview, one that embraces interconnectedness and interdependence not just within human society, but across the entire web of life. It's a perspective that might lead to a more profound respect for the delicate balance of ecosystems and a deeper understanding of our shared destiny with the planet, inspiring stewardship over dominion. Ultimately, the thought experiment of a world on the brink, forced to confront its own vulnerability, serves as a powerful mirror reflecting our current realities. It compels us to ponder our inherent strengths, our capacity for adaptation, our unwavering courage in the face of adversity, and our innate drive to protect what we cherish. Yet it also highlights our profound weaknesses, the seductive comfort of complacency, the divisive nature of fear, and the ease with which trust can erode. The enduring question, therefore, is not merely how we would survive such a cataclysm, but how we might live differently, more consciously, more compassionately, and with a deeper appreciation for the intricate, fragile miracle that is human civilization, long before any bite forces us to truly value it, beyond the immediate, existential struggle for survival. A world redeemed from the brink would face the arduous, generational task of psychological reconstruction. Consider the pervasive, unspoken phantom limb sensation of a lost civilization, a collective grief that would permeate every aspect of daily life. The very air would carry a residue of absence, demanding new rituals of remembrance for places and people irrevocably gone. This profound psychic landscape necessitates more than just physical rebuilding. It requires an intricate process of collective mourning and the deliberate forging of new narratives that acknowledge the darkness while pointing towards a nascent future. How does a society heal when its wounds are carved into the very geography of its cities and the memories of its oldest survivors? Moreover, the fundamental concept of trust, once a largely unconscious underpinning of societal interaction, would undergo an intense crucible-like reevaluation. Every interaction, every new acquaintance, would be filtered through the lens of past betrayals and compassionately, and with a deeper appreciation for the intricate, fragile miracle that is human civilization, long before any bite forces us to truly value it. The desperate quest for answers in a world overrun by the ravenous dead fundamentally redefines the very essence of scientific inquiry. Picture the makeshift laboratories now, not gleaming sterile environments, but often scavenged remnants of forgotten facilities, jury-rigged with salvaged equipment, powered by erratic generators. Here, the scientific method transforms into a brutal, immediate improvisation. Instead of peer-reviewed grants and meticulous long-term studies, research becomes a high-stakes gamble. Each experiment a race against time and dwindling resources. The hunt for surviving expertise isn't limited to virologists. It encompasses epidemiologists capable of deciphering erratic spread patterns, geneticists who might unlock the virus's code, and even behavioral psychologists who could discern patterns in the horde's seemingly mindless aggression. These disparate minds, often scarred by loss, coalesced in a desperate ad hoc consortium, their shared humanity the only remaining foundation for collaborative progress. Consequently, the focus shifts beyond merely combating the infected to understanding their systemic vulnerabilities, not just their physical weaknesses. Imagine the possibility that the virus, for all its terrifying efficacy, might possess a fatal flaw in its sensory processing. Perhaps specific auditory frequencies could induce a catatonic state, or certain light wavelengths could disrupt their hyperperception, rendering them temporarily inert. Consider the potential for a non-lethal deterrent, a biochemical agent that doesn't kill but instead triggers a profound disorientation or a state of metabolic collapse, effectively neutralizing the threat without direct combat. This line of inquiry moves beyond brute force, delving into the nuanced biological architecture of the reanimated, seeking the subtle chinks in their terrifying armor. This arduous journey of discovery demands an unprecedented level of interdisciplinary synergy. Think about the need for military strategists to analyze horde movements, discerning tactical weaknesses in their seemingly chaotic surges. Engineers would be crucial, not just for fortifications, but for devising novel traps, sonic emitters, or environmental barriers designed to exploit the virus's specific characteristics, perhaps channeling the infected into kill zones or diverting them from critical supply routes. Furthermore, logisticians with their invaluable knowledge of resource allocation and movement would become the unsung heroes, ensuring that vital samples, data, or experimental compounds reach their intended destinations across a fractured globe. Each field, once distinct, now converges into a singular, desperate effort to decipher the enemy. Acquiring the vital intelligence necessary for these breakthroughs comes at an almost unbearable cost. Every piece of data, every scrap of information regarding the virus's peculiar behavior or an infected individual's unique response to a stimulus is paid for in sweat, blood, and often lives. Imagine hazardous raids on abandoned research facilities, where encrypted hard drives might hold a fragment of a forgotten vaccine trial, or daring forays into densely populated urban centers to observe horde dynamics firsthand. Consider the chilling necessity of capturing and containing infected specimens for study, a perilous undertaking that pushes the boundaries of human courage and scientific ethics. Each retrieved sample, each recovered document, is a testament to extraordinary sacrifice, often representing the last vestiges of a once thriving academic or medical institution. The global nature of this desperate scavenger hunt means that clues are scattered like shattered glass across continents. A particular strain of the virus might manifest differently in a frigid Arctic research station compared to a sweltering equatorial city, offering distinct environmental sensitivities or behavioral patterns. This necessitates a globe-trotting expedition, a relentless pursuit of disparate fragments of information, often held by isolated pockets of survivors or locked away in remote, forgotten archives. The logistical nightmare of connecting these far-flung data points, of establishing precarious lines of communication and transport in a world devoid of infrastructure, becomes a central, harrowing challenge, transforming the pursuit of knowledge into an odyssey of survival against overwhelming odds. The profound psychological burden on those tasked with unraveling these secrets is immense. Imagine the crushing weight of humanity's fate resting on a handful of individuals, each failed experiment or lost colleague adding to an already unbearable despair. The relentless exposure to the grotesque reality of the infected, coupled with the constant pressure to find an answer, could easily erode even the strongest resolve. Yet, it is in this crucible of desperation that true intellectual fortitude is forged, where the flicker of a single, promising hypothesis can ignite a renewed sense of purpose, driving the weary forward despite the pervasive shadow of annihilation. The desperate pursuit of a solution in a world teetering on the precipice of oblivion inevitably forces humanity to confront profound ethical chasms previously unimaginable. Now consider the agonizing choices faced by the dwindling scientific community. When every moment counts, does the end justify means that would, in a sane world, be deemed monstrous? Imagine the grim necessity of controlled experiments on newly infected individuals, not for a cure for them, but to observe the virus's progression, its response to untested compounds, or its reaction to extreme environmental stressors. the line between desperate research and unforgivable exploitation blurs, demanding a moral calculus where the potential salvation of billions outweighs the sanctity of an individual life, or what remains of it. This isn't theoretical. It's a chilling imperative to push boundaries, knowing that failure means absolute extinction. Furthermore, the very mechanism of knowledge dissemination undergoes a radical transformation. With established academic journals and global conferences rendered obsolete, how does verified data propagate across isolated pockets of survivors? Picture critical findings scrawled on salvaged whiteboards, transmitted via precarious shortwave radio bursts, or entrusted to couriers navigating perilous landscapes. The meticulous peer review process, once a cornerstone of scientific integrity, is replaced by a desperate reliance on reputation and the immediate, undeniable efficacy of results. This fragile information highway is rife with the potential for misinterpretation, distortion, or outright loss, turning every successful communication into a minor triumph against chaos, and every lost message a potential setback for humanity's last hope. Beyond the immediate crisis, the insidious threat of the virus's own evolutionary capacity looms large. What if the pathogen, in its relentless propagation, develops new strains, perhaps exhibiting enhanced resilience to previously identified weaknesses, or even manifesting new, terrifying behavioral adaptations in its hosts? This would trigger an entirely new arms race, forcing researchers to constantly reevaluate their understanding of the enemy, chasing a moving target. Imagine the despair of discovering that a hard-won breakthrough is suddenly rendered obsolete by a viral mutation, pushing the remnants of humanity back to square one, their brief glimmer of hope extinguished by the enemy's biological cunning. Moreover, the sheer psychological toll on the remaining scientific minds extends far beyond mere despair. It delves into realms of obsessive dedication and profound personal sacrifice. Consider the scientists who would willingly expose themselves to controlled risks, foregoing sleep and sustenance, driven by a singular, all-consuming need for an answer. Their identities become intrinsically linked to the research, their personal lives dissolving into a relentless cycle of experimentation and analysis. This often leads to a chilling detachment, a necessary emotional barrier against the overwhelming horror, allowing them to view the infected not as former humans, but as pure biological problems to be solved, regardless of the ethical cost. This desperate landscape also fosters an unexpected crucible for serendipitous discovery, often born from unconventional methods. When sophisticated equipment is unavailable, ingenuity becomes paramount. Think of survivors observing subtle patterns in the horde's movement during specific weather conditions, or noticing an unusual reaction to improvised chemical agents, then relaying these anecdotal observations to the struggling research teams. These seemingly minor details, dismissed in a more structured environment, could become the crucial missing pieces, leading to breakthroughs that sophisticated laboratories might have overlooked. It's a testament to the raw human capacity for observation and the unexpected utility of desperate measures, proving that sometimes the most profound insights emerge from the most unlikely of places. The cessation of the relentless zombie horde, should humanity ever achieve such a monumental victory, would not simply mark an end to the immediate horror. Rather, it would inaugurate an era of profound introspection and a radical redefinition of what it means to rebuild. Imagine the silent, pervasive echo of that global trauma, not merely in the shattered skylines, but within the itself. The vast libraries of human understanding once taken for granted would become priceless treasures, their contents painstakingly preserved and transmitted across generations. Yet the emphasis would shift. Theoretical abstractions might yield to the urgent wisdom of practical application and historical precedent. Imagine societies meticulously studying past human endeavors, not just for technological insights but for lessons in social cohesion, resource management, and ethical governance, learning from both triumphs and catastrophic failures. This would cultivate a deep reverence for ancestral knowledge, ensuring that the hard-won lessons of the past, however painful, are never forgotten. Ultimately, the chilling thought experiment of a world consumed by a plague of the undead serves as a stark, yet powerful mirror. It compels us to scrutinize the vulnerabilities inherent in our current interconnected existence, prompting critical questions about our societal resilience, our ethical compass, and our collective preparedness for the truly unforeseen. It is a potent reminder that curiosity, the relentless drive to understand the unknown, is not merely an academic pursuit but an essential survival mechanism. For in dissecting the anatomy of a fictional collapse, we gain invaluable insights into the intricate mechanics of our own fragile reality, inspiring us to build a more robust, more compassionate, and ultimately, more enduring future. The final cessation of the relentless zombie horde, if such a moment ever arrived, would not herald a simple return to normalcy, but rather the dawn of an entirely reconfigured human existence. Consider the enduring psychological imprint left upon those who survived, a deep-seated apprehension that would permeate every aspect of future societal design. The very concept of safety would forever be redefined. no longer a given but a precarious state meticulously maintained through constant vigilance and adaptive foresight. This collective trauma would forge an entirely new generational identity, one shaped by the stark realization of humanity's profound vulnerability and the arbitrary nature of our previously held sense of control over the planet. Moreover, the profound silence that would descend upon a world once teeming with the cacophony of modern life would compel a revaluation of our relationship with sound itself. The absence of constant hums, distant sirens, and the pervasive drone of machinery would amplify natural world sounds, perhaps fostering a renewed appreciation for the subtle rhythms of life that predate human dominance. This auditory shift could, in turn, cultivate a deeper connection to the environment, encouraging a more harmonious coexistence rather than a continued pattern of unchecked exploitation. The very act of listening, once a passive reception, would become an active, critical skill, honed by years of deciphering subtle cues between life and death. Beyond this immediate impact, imagine the radical restructuring of human ambition. The insatiable drive for endless growth and accumulation, which characterized the pre-collapse era, would likely be supplanted by a fervent dedication to sustainability and the meticulous preservation of resources. Communities would not merely strive for survival, but for a resilient self-sufficiency, fostering local economies built on collaboration and resourcefulness rather than global competition. This paradigm shift would necessitate a profound reskilling of the population, elevating practical craftsmanship, ecological stewardship, and community building to paramount importance, thereby reshaping educational systems and societal values from the ground up. Perhaps most profoundly, such an ordeal would compel a fundamental re-examination of our place within the vast cosmic tapestry. Stripped bare of technological illusions and societal constructs, humanity would confront its raw biological essence, recognizing itself as merely one species among countless others, susceptible to forces far beyond its control. This humility, born from the crucible of near extinction, could foster a new philosophical outlook, one that embraces interconnectedness and interdependence not just within human society, but across the entire web of life. It's a perspective that might lead to a more profound respect for the delicate balance of ecosystems and a deeper understanding of our shared destiny with the planet. Such an experience would also ignite an unprecedented drive for knowledge, but with a crucial distinction. The pursuit would not be for dominance or exploitation, but for understanding, for resilience, and for the wisdom to prevent a recurrence. Scientific inquiry would be imbued with a renewed sense of sacred purpose, meticulously documenting the lessons learned, preserving biological knowledge, and exploring sustainable pathways for future coexistence. This would transcend mere academic curiosity, becoming an ethical imperative, a solemn duty to ensure that the sacrifices made were not in vain, and that future generations possess the insights necessary to navigate an inherently unpredictable world. The ultimate question then becomes not simply whether humanity survives, but how it chooses to live in the aftermath. Would the memory of the Horde forever cast a shadow of fear and isolation? Or would it serve as a powerful catalyst for unprecedented unity and a deeper, more empathetic appreciation for every living moment? The answer would hinge on the collective will to transcend trauma, to rebuild with wisdom, and to rediscover the profound joy of simply being in a world that almost wasn't. This enduring reflection upon our own resilience, our capacity for both destruction and boundless creation, remains the most compelling legacy of such a terrifying possibility. The cessation of the relentless zombie plague, should humanity ever achieve such a monumental victory, would not simply mark an end to the immediate horror. Rather, it would inaugurate an era of profound introspection and a radical redefinition of what it means to rebuild. Imagine the silent, pervasive echo of that global trauma, not merely in the shattered skylines, but within the very psyche of a generation that witnessed civilization's precipitous fall. This collective experience would undoubtedly foster an entirely new societal blueprint, one characterized by an acute awareness of interconnectedness and an inherent distrust of the very systems that once promised stability. The future, therefore, would not be about restoring a past paradigm, but about forging an entirely novel path, shaped by hard-won lessons in resilience and the poignant memory of nearly losing everything. Consider, then, how this profound shift that would alter our aspirations. The former emphasis on boundless material acquisition and the relentless pursuit of economic expansion, once hallmarks of global ambition, would likely recede into historical anomaly. In its place, a deeper reverence for fundamental necessities, clean water, fertile land, and robust community networks would emerge as the true markers of prosperity. This recalibration of values would naturally prioritize sustainable practices, fostering innovations centered on resource regeneration and ecological harmony, fundamentally transforming our interaction with the natural world. Consequently, ingenuity would pivot from abstract digital advancements to tangible solutions for survival and communal thriving, fostering a profound respect for foundational skills and practical craftsmanship. Furthermore, the very concept of human progress would undergo a rigorous re-examination, no longer measured solely by technological leaps or economic output. Advancement would be gauged by our capacity for empathy, our ability to foster genuine connections, and our collective commitment to safeguarding the delicate balance of existence. This might lead to a more decentralized, localized model of human settlement and governance, where smaller self-reliant communities, bound by shared purpose and mutual aid, become the new norm. The inherent fragility of large, complex systems, so devastatingly exposed during the collapse, would serve as a constant, sobering reminder, guiding every decision towards robustness and adaptability. Beyond the practicalities of reconstruction, the intellectual landscape would also be profoundly reshaped. The relentless human drive for understanding, far from being extinguished, would likely intensify. But with a sharpened focus on existential questions and the enduring mysteries of life, scientific inquiry would be imbued with a solemn duty to comprehend not just the mechanisms of pathogens, but the intricate interplay of biological, social, and environmental factors that govern planetary health. This would foster a new breed of interdisciplinary thought, recognizing that true wisdom lies in holistic understanding, ensuring that the hard-won lessons of survival are meticulously preserved and transmitted across generations as a bulwark against future, unforeseen threats. Ultimately, the thought experiment of a world on the brink, forced to confront its own vulnerability, serves as a powerful mirror reflecting our present realities. It compels us to ponder our inherent strengths, our capacity for adaptation, our unwavering courage in the face of adversity, and our innate drive to protect what we cherish. Yet, it also highlights our profound weaknesses, the seductive comfort of complacency, the divisive nature of fear, and the ease with which trust can erode. The enduring question, therefore, is not merely how we would survive such a cataclysm, but how we might live differently, more consciously, more complacency, leading some groups to hoard resources and wait out the storm, tragically underestimating the virus's chilling efficiency and its capacity to propagate through even the most isolated populations, shattering any hope of a passive reprieve. The brutal reality was that this enemy did not conform to conventional epidemiological models, rendering such passive strategies suicidal. Consider, too, the fiercely debated and ethically fraught question of radical environmental intervention. As the infected swarmed, consuming vast swaths of urban and rural landscapes, some factions advocated for extreme, scorched earth tactics. Proposals ranged from widespread incendiary bombing of major cities to deploying potent chemical agents to sterilize vast regions, aiming to deny the infected their breeding grounds. This perspective, born of desperation, sparked furious controversy. Opponents vehemently argued against the irreversible ecological devastation such measures would unleash, warning of long-term environmental collapse, rendering the planet uninhabitable. Even if the infected threat was miraculously neutralized, the dilemma was stark: sacrifice the planet's future for immediate survival, or risk extinction by preserving an unsalvageable ecosystem. Furthermore, the very concept of preserving humanity's genetic viability and intellectual legacy became a contentious point. Beyond the immediate struggle for sustenance, a deeper, more existential challenge loomed, ensuring the long-term survival of a diverse human gene pool, free from the ravages of inbreeding within isolated communities. This also encompassed the agonizing debate over dedicating precious resources, manpower, energy, expertise to archiving vast libraries of scientific knowledge, cultural artifacts, and historical records. Many argued such endeavors were a frivolous luxury in a world teetering on the brink, while others passionately contended that without its collective memory and the potential for future intellectual growth, humanity would be little more than clever animals, even if they survived. Another dangerous misconception that cost countless lives was the unwavering faith in geographical isolation as an absolute shield. Desperate survivors often embarked on perilous journeys to remote islands, high mountain ranges, or vast desert expanses, convinced that sheer distance or natural barriers would render them invulnerable. Yet the virus, or rather the infected, proved astonishingly adaptable. Rogue infected, carried by storm surges, stowed away on derelict vessels, or simply driven by their relentless hunger across seemingly impassable terrain, frequently breached these supposed sanctuaries. Moreover, the human desperation that followed them often proved an even greater threat, as starving, uninfected survivors, driven by rumor and desperation, would violate these isolated havens in their frantic search for safety, inadvertently carrying the contagion or simply overwhelming the existing inhabitants. Finally, the internal challenge of social engineering within burgeoning survivor enclaves presented a complex moral and practical quandary. With the collapse of established law and order, new methods for maintaining cohesion and preventing internal strife had to be forged. This often involved the implementation of severe, often draconian, codes of conduct, rationing systems, and strict surveillance to prevent theft, sabotage, or the spread of panic. The debates centered on how much individual liberty could be sacrificed for collective security and whether the psychological well-being of the survivors could endure such regimented, often joyless existences. The objective was not merely to survive the external threat, but to prevent the community from devouring itself from within, a battle against human nature as much as against the undead. As the dust settles on the ruins of a world irrevocably altered, the true measure of humanity isn't found in the grand narratives of survival, but in the quiet, profound shifts within the individual spirit. Consider, for a moment, the radical revaluation of time itself. The relentless, future-oriented grind of pre-apocalyptic existence, driven by deadlines and long-term plans, vanished overnight. In its place emerged a heightened awareness of the immediate, the preciousness of the present moment, where a simple sunrise or an unmolested breath became a profound victory. This forced immersion in the now stripped away layers of existential anxiety, replacing it with a raw, almost primal engagement with life, an unexpected clarity born from catastrophe. Furthermore, this cataclysmic event, while devastating, paradoxically illuminated the inherent, often overlooked, beauty in the mundane. Imagine the rediscovered majesty of a night sky unmarred by light pollution, or the profound taste of a meal cultivated by one's own hands, an act of creation in a world defined by destruction. The subtle symphony of nature, once drowned out by urban clamor, resonated with newfound significance. These aren't merely sensory experiences, they represent a fundamental recalibration of human appreciation, where the simplest elements of existence, previously taken for granted, acquired an almost sacred quality, fostering a deep, unexpected connection to the fundamental rhythms of the planet. A deeper reflection reveals how such an ordeal fundamentally redefines the very concept of legacy. Before the collapse, legacy was often tied to material wealth, grand achievements, or the imprint left on a global stage. In the aftermath, however, the enduring legacy becomes far more intimate, the shared knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next, the continued act of nurturing life, the simple fact of having carried forward the flame of human consciousness. The emphasis shifts from monumental structures to the fragile, yet resilient scaffolding of human connection and the transmission of basic, vital wisdom, ensuring that the very essence of humanity, however diminished, finds a path to persist. Moreover, the crucible of this global nightmare forged a nuanced understanding of courage. Moving beyond mere physical bravery in combat, true fortitude manifested in the quiet, daily acts of perseverance, maintaining hope in the face of overwhelming despair, extending kindness to a stranger when self-preservation screamed otherwise, or simply choosing to rebuild when the logical conclusion was surrender. This was a deeper, more enduring form of resilience, an internal wellspring that defied the external horror, proving that the human spirit, when stripped of all artifice, possesses an indomitable will to not just survive but to be. Consequently, the world's harrowing experience serves as a stark, enduring lesson in the critical importance of adaptability, not just as a survival mechanism, but as an inherent human characteristic. The ability to pivot, to innovate under extreme duress, and to shed outdated paradigms proved paramount. This wasn't merely about physical agility. It encompassed intellectual flexibility, emotional resilience, and the capacity for rapid, collective learning. It highlighted that our greatest strength lies not in rigid structures or fixed plans, but in our dynamic capacity to respond to the unimaginable, to continuously reinvent what it means to be human in the face of unprecedented adversity. Ultimately, the true takeaway from such a profound global transformation isn't just about the fragility of civilization, but about the astonishing, often surprising, strength that emerges when everything familiar is stripped away. It's a powerful reminder that within each of us lies an untapped reservoir of ingenuity, compassion, and an unyielding will to find meaning, even amidst the most profound desolation. This reflection compels us to consider, if faced with such an absolute test, what fundamental truths about ourselves and about our place in the universe might we truly discover. The world, having endured the harrowing crucible of the undead tide, now faced a quieter, yet equally profound, transformation. The reimagination of its very social fabric, where once rigid hierarchies and established governmental bodies dictated order, a more fluid, organic form of collective decision-making began to coalesce among scattered human enclaves. Think of small self-governing clusters, not bound by ancient borders or political ideologies, but united by shared necessity and mutual trust. These nascent communities, born from the ashes of global collapse, often adopted a direct participatory model, where every able-bodied individual contributed to collective security and resource allocation. This wasn't merely about survival. It was about forging a new social contract, one built on immediate accountability and a deeply felt interdependence, where the welfare of the individual was inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole. This spontaneous emergence of horizontal, rather than vertical, governance marked a radical departure from the centralized systems of the past. Furthermore, the profound silence imposed by the infected, whose sensitivity to sound made noise, a death sentence, inadvertently spurred a fascinating evolution in human communication. Beyond hushed whispers and hand signals, Survivors developed intricate visual codes, symbolic languages, and even sophisticated light patterns to convey complex information across distances or in perilous environments. Imagine elaborate flag signals adapted from maritime traditions, or a new lexicon of gestures refined over years of silent vigilance. These innovative communication methods transcended linguistic barriers, fostering a silent, yet deeply understood, common